Independence, Missouri, December 1991. The kind of town where neighbors still waved from porches and children rode bikes until the streetlights came on. A place where Christmas decorations went up the day after Thanksgiving, and the smell of wood smoke drifted through quiet streets on cold mornings. Emily Rose Carter lived on Maple Avenue, a tree-lined street 3 blocks from William Chrisman High School. She was 7 years old. Brown hair that fell just past her shoulders, a gap between her front teeth. She loved strawberry ice cream and wore a silver bracelet her grandmother had given her the year before. Every morning she walked to Sycamore Elementary with her older brother Marcus. He was 12, protective, the kind of brother who carried her backpack when it got too heavy. On the morning of December 13th, Emily woke before her alarm. She had written a letter to Santa the night before. Red construction paper folded in half. Crayon drawings of a puppy and a dollhouse. She had sealed it in an envelope and planned to drop it in the mailbox on the corner of Maple and Truman Road. Her mother, Janet Carter, made pancakes that morning. Emily ate quickly. She zipped her purple coat, the one with the fake fur around the hood. Marcus waited by the door. Their mother kissed them both on the forehead. She told them to be careful crossing Truman Road. Emily clutched the letter in her mittened hand. The air was sharp. Frost clung to the grass. They walked together until they reached the corner mailbox. Emily let go of her brother's hand. She ran ahead to drop the letter inside. Marcus turned to tie his shoe. When he looked up, Emily was gone. He called her name. Once. Twice. The street was empty. No cars. No movement. Just the sound of wind through bare branches. He ran to the mailbox. Her letter was inside. He could see the red edge of it through the slot. But Emily was not there. He sprinted back toward their house, shouting. Janet Carter heard him from the kitchen. She dropped the dish she was holding. Glass shattered on the tile. She ran outside in her slippers. Marcus was breathless, crying. He kept saying the same thing. She was right there. She was right there. If this happened in your neighborhood, wouldn't you want to know how it was finally solved? Tell us in the comments what city or country you're watching from. It's incredible to see how far these stories travel. And if you'd like to follow more mysteries finally solved through DNA, consider subscribing to the DNA Archives. Every day, we uncover another truth time tried to hide. Janet Carter called the Independence Police Department at 8:17 in the morning. Officers arrived within minutes. They searched the neighborhood, knocked on doors, asked questions. No one had seen anything, no screams, no strangers, no cars speeding away. It was as if Emily had simply vanished between one breath and the next. By noon, the entire block was filled with police cruisers. Search dogs were brought in. They picked up Emily's scent near the mailbox, then lost it 20 feet away near the curb. Detective Raymond Hollis took lead on the case. He was 42, a veteran investigator with a reputation for thoroughness. He interviewed Marcus 3 times that first day. The boy's story never changed. Emily had been there, then she was not. The town mobilized. Volunteers printed flyers. Emily's school photo was copied onto thousands of sheets of paper. Her face appeared on telephone poles, storefront windows, bulletin boards at the grocery store. Local news stations covered the story every night. Janet and her husband, Michael Carter, appeared on camera, pleading for anyone with information to come forward. Michael worked at a factory in Kansas City. He had been at work when Emily disappeared. He would never forgive himself for that, for not being there, for not walking his children to school that morning. The days blurred together. The Carters barely slept. Their house filled with casseroles and condolence cards. People meant well, but nothing helped. By Christmas, there were no leads. Emily's letter to Santa remained in the mailbox for 2 days before postal workers retrieved it. It was logged into evidence. No one thought much of it at the time. Just a child's letter. Red paper. Crayon. A smudged fingerprint on the envelope. The investigation continued through winter, then spring, then summer. Tips came in. None led anywhere. A man in St. Louis claimed he saw a girl matching Emily's description. It was not her. A psychic called the police department. Detective Hollis hung up. The case began to cool. Not because anyone stopped caring, but because there was nowhere left to look. Years passed. The Carters stayed in Independence. They could not leave. Leaving felt like abandoning Emily. Janet kept her daughter's room exactly as it had been. The bed made, stuffed animals arranged on the pillow, the silver bracelet on the nightstand. Michael grew quieter. He stopped going to church. Marcus graduated high school. He studied criminal justice in college. He wanted to become a detective. He wanted to find his sister. But even he knew the chances were slim. Cold cases rarely stayed warm. Memories faded. Witnesses moved away. Evidence sat in boxes untouched. Detective Hollis retired in 2003. He had worked Emily's case for over a decade. He had followed every lead, interviewed hundreds of people, combed through phone records and alibis. Nothing ever fit. He handed the case file to a younger detective, Angela Reeves. She read through it twice. She saw the gaps, the dead ends. But she also saw something Hollis had noted in his final report. A suspicion, a name that kept appearing in witness statements. A man who lived 2 streets over from the Carters. A man who had been interviewed early on, then cleared. Reeves wanted to revisit that thread. But the case had gone cold for a reason. There was no physical evidence, no body, no witnesses. Just a child who had disappeared in broad daylight. By 2010, Emily Carter's case was nearly 20 years old. The flyers had long since faded from telephone poles. The news stopped covering it. People in Independence still remembered, but they did not talk about it as much. It became a ghost story, a cautionary tale parents told their children. Do not talk to strangers. Do not wander off. Stay where I can see you. Janet Carter aged in ways that had nothing to do with time. Her hair went gray early. She stopped smiling in photographs. Michael took early retirement. He spent his days in the garage working on projects he never finished. Marcus became a police officer in Kansas City. He requested to work cold cases. His supervisors knew why. The evidence boxes sat in a climate-controlled storage facility in Jackson County. Row after row of unsolved cases. Cardboard containers labeled with case numbers and dates. Emily's box was marked 914782. Inside were photographs, witness statements, maps of the neighborhood, a purple coat, a pair of mittens, and a red envelope. The letter to Santa. It had been dusted for prints in 1991. Emily's fingerprints were on it. So were smudges from the mailbox slot. But no one had thought to test it further. DNA analysis in 1991 was not what it would become. The technology existed, but it was expensive, time-consuming, reserved for cases with clear suspects or biological evidence like blood or hair. A child's letter did not seem relevant. Cold cases don't stay alive unless people keep remembering them. If you want more stories like this, cases that seemed forgotten until DNA brought answers, subscribe to the DNA archives and help these stories stay alive. New investigations and discoveries are shared here every day. In 2015, the Independence Police Department received a grant, federal funding for cold case DNA testing. Detective Reeves had been advocating for it. She had a list of cases she wanted reopened. Emily Carter was at the top. She pulled the evidence box from storage. She opened it in a sterile lab room. She wore gloves. She photographed everything before touching it. The purple coat still smelled faintly of fabric softener. The mittens were small, child-sized. The red envelope was brittle. The paper had yellowed slightly, but it was intact. Reeves turned it over in her hands. She could see the crayon marks, the careful, uneven handwriting. Dear Santa. She opened the envelope. The letter was still inside. A drawing of a puppy, a dollhouse, a list of wishes written in purple crayon. Reeves sent the letter to the Missouri State Highway Patrol Crime Lab. She requested full DNA analysis. Touch DNA, saliva, anything that might have been left behind. The process took months. The lab was backlogged, but Reeves was patient. She had learned that from Hollis. Cold cases required persistence. They required belief that answers still existed even after decades. In August of 2016, the lab results came back. There were multiple DNA profiles on the letter. Emily's was the dominant one. Her saliva on the envelope flap where she had licked it to seal. Her fingerprints on the paper. But there was something else. A partial profile. Male. Unknown. It was on the exterior of the envelope, near the corner. As if someone had handled it, touched it, held it in their hands. Reeves ran the profile through CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, a national database of DNA profiles from convicted offenders, arrestees, and unsolved crimes. She did not expect a hit. Most cold cases did not get that lucky. But 3 days later, she received a notification. A match. Partial, but strong enough to investigate. The profile belonged to a man named David Allen Pritchard. He was 62 years old. He lived in Independence. He had been arrested in 2012 for a DUI. His DNA had been entered into the system as part of a routine booking process. Reeves pulled his file. She felt her stomach tighten. David Pritchard had lived on Walnut Street in 1991, 2 blocks from the Carters. He had been interviewed during the initial investigation. He told detectives he had been at work the morning Emily disappeared. His employer confirmed it. He was cleared. But now his DNA was on Emily's letter to Santa. Bloco 3. Detective Reeves sat in her office for a long time, the file open in front of her. David Pritchard's photograph stared back. A man in his 30s when Emily disappeared, brown hair, average build, unremarkable. He had worked as a maintenance supervisor at a shopping center in Independence. Married, no children, no criminal record at the time. During the original investigation, Detective Hollis had interviewed him briefly. Pritchard said he left for work at 6:30 that morning. He clocked in at 7:15. The shopping center was 15 minutes from Maple Avenue. Emily disappeared around 8. The timeline seemed to eliminate him. But timelines could be manipulated. Alibis could be manufactured. Reeves knew that. She reviewed the interview transcript from 1991. Pritchard had been cooperative, calm. He expressed sympathy for the Carter family. He said he had seen the news coverage. He offered to help in any way he could. Hollis had noted that Pritchard seemed genuinely concerned. There was nothing in his demeanor that raised suspicion. No nervousness, no inconsistencies. He was crossed off the list of potential witnesses and never contacted again. But DNA did not lie. If Pritchard's DNA was on that envelope, he had touched it. The question was when and why. Reeves called the Missouri State Highway Patrol Crime Lab. She spoke to the forensic analyst who had processed the letter. She asked if there was any way to determine when the DNA had been deposited. The analyst explained that DNA degradation could provide rough estimates, but nothing precise. What they could say with certainty was that the DNA was not a result of contamination. It had been on the envelope for a significant period, likely decades. Reeves asked if there was enough material for a second test. The analyst confirmed there was. Reeves requested a full retest. She wanted to be sure. She wanted no room for doubt. While waiting for the second results, Reeves began building a profile of David Pritchard. She pulled his employment records from 1991. He had worked at the Truman Corners shopping center. His shift started at 7, but his time card showed he clocked in at 7:23 on December 13th, not 7:15, as he had claimed. 8 minutes, a small discrepancy, but enough to matter. Reeves checked the distance between Pritchard's home on Walnut Street and the shopping center. 12 minutes by car. That left a window. A narrow one, but a window. She pulled his marriage records. David Pritchard married Linda Faye Morrison in 1986. They divorced in 1995, 4 years after Emily disappeared. Reeves found Linda's current address. She lived in Lee's Summit, a town 20 minutes south of Independence. Reeves drove there on a Tuesday afternoon. The house was small, a single-story ranch with a chain-link fence. Linda answered the door. She was in her 60s now. Gray hair pulled into a ponytail. She looked tired. Reeves introduced herself, showed her badge. Linda's face tightened. She asked what this was about. Reeves said she was investigating an old case. She asked if Linda remembered December 1991, the disappearance of Emily Carter. Linda nodded slowly. She said everyone in Independence remembered. Reeves asked if she could come inside. Linda hesitated, then stepped aside. The living room was cluttered but clean. Photographs of grandchildren on the mantel. A cat sleeping on the couch. Reeves sat down. She asked Linda about her marriage to David Pritchard. Linda's expression changed. She said it had been a long time. She did not like talking about him. Reeves said she understood. She asked if Linda remembered anything unusual about David's behavior around the time Emily disappeared. Linda was quiet for a moment. Then she said something Reeves would never forget. He came home late that morning. Reeves leaned forward. She asked Linda to explain. Linda said David was supposed to be at work by 7, but he did not leave the house until almost 7:30. She remembered because they had argued about it. He said he had forgotten something. He went back into the garage. He was out there for 10 minutes. Then he left. Linda said she did not think much of it at the time. David was always forgetting things, his wallet, his keys, his lunch. But later, after Emily disappeared, Linda had wondered, She never said anything. She told herself she was being paranoid, that it was just a coincidence. But the thought stayed with her. Even after the divorce, even now. Reeves asked if Linda knew what David had been doing in the garage that morning. Linda said she did not. She never went in there. It was his space. He kept tools and old furniture and boxes of things he never threw away. Reeves asked if Linda remembered anything else. Linda looked down at her hands. She said David had been different after Emily disappeared. Quieter. He stopped sleeping well. He would get up in the middle of the night and sit in the living room, staring at nothing. Linda asked him once if he was okay. He said he was fine, but he was not fine. Their marriage fell apart slowly. Linda said she always felt like there was something he was not telling her, something heavy, but she never pushed. She was afraid of what she might find out. Reeves thanked Linda for her time. She left her card. She drove back to Independence. Her mind was racing. The timeline was beginning to shift. David Pritchard had lied about when he left for work. He had been late. He had spent time in his garage. And his DNA was on Emily's letter. The second lab results came back 3 weeks later. Confirmed. The DNA on the envelope belonged to David Allen Pritchard. Reeves had enough to bring him in for questioning. But she wanted more. She wanted to know where Emily was. She wanted to give the Carters answers. Not just a name, not just a suspect. She wanted the truth. Detective Reeves built her case quietly. She did not want Pritchard to know he was being investigated. Not yet. She obtained a warrant to search his current residence, a small house on the east side of Independence. Single story, beige siding, a detached garage in the back. Pritchard still lived alone. His ex-wife had been right about one thing. He had never remarried, never had children. He worked as a security guard at a warehouse in Kansas City. He kept to himself. Neighbors described him as polite but distant, the kind of man who mowed his lawn on Saturdays and never caused trouble. Reeves assembled a team, 4 officers, a forensic technician. They arrived at 6 in the morning on a Thursday in October 2016. Pritchard answered the door in a bathrobe. He looked older than his photograph, thinner. His hair was white now. He blinked at the officers, asked what this was about. Reeves showed him the warrant. She said they needed to search the property. Pritchard did not resist. He stepped aside. He asked if he could get dressed. Reeves nodded. An officer accompanied him to the bedroom. The house was neat, almost unnaturally so. The furniture was old but well-maintained. No dishes in the sink. No clutter on the counters. The walls were bare except for a single framed photograph of a lake. Reeves moved through the rooms methodically. The bedroom, the bathroom, the kitchen. Nothing stood out, nothing seemed unusual. Then she opened the door to the garage. It was darker inside, cooler. The smell of oil and dust. Metal shelves lined the walls. Tools hung from pegboards. A workbench sat against the far wall. And in the corner, stacked neatly, were cardboard boxes. Dozens of them. Reeves pulled on gloves. She opened the first box. Old tax documents, receipts. Nothing remarkable. The second box contained books, paperbacks with cracked spines. The third box was heavier. She lifted the flaps. Inside were newspapers, clipped articles. All of them about Emily Carter. The disappearance, the search efforts, the appeals from her parents. Reeves felt her pulse quicken. She called the forensic technician over. He photographed the box, every article, every clipping. Some were yellowed with age, others had been laminated, preserved. There were dozens of them spanning years. Pritchard had been following the case, keeping track of it, saving every piece of coverage. Reeves moved to the next box. This one was smaller, sealed with packing tape. She cut through it carefully. Inside was a purple mitten, child-sized. Reeves stopped breathing. She recognized it. She had seen its match in the evidence box. Emily's other mitten, the one she had been wearing the morning she disappeared. Reeves stood up. She walked out of the garage. She found Pritchard sitting on the couch in the living room. An officer stood nearby. Reeves sat down across from him. She did not speak for a moment. She just watched him. His hands were folded in his lap. His face was blank. He looked at her. He asked if they had found what they were looking for. Reeves said they had. She asked Pritchard if he wanted to tell her what happened. Pritchard was quiet. He looked down at his hands. He said he had been waiting for this day. For 25 years he had been waiting. He said he knew the DNA would catch up to him eventually. He just did not know when. Reeves asked him to start from the beginning. Pritchard nodded slowly. He said he had been driving to work that morning. December 13th, 1991. He was running late. He took a shortcut through the neighborhood. He saw Emily at the mailbox. She was alone. He stopped the car. He did not plan to. He just stopped. He said he rolled down the window. He asked if she needed help. Emily looked at him. She said she was fine. She was just mailing a letter. Pritchard said he offered her a ride to school. He said he knew her brother. He had seen them walking together before. Emily hesitated. Pritchard said she should not walk alone. It was cold. He would drop her off. Emily looked down the street. Her brother was not in sight. She got in the car. Pritchard said he did not mean for it to happen. He said he was going to take her to school, but then he drove past the school. He kept driving. Emily asked where they were going. He said he was taking a different route. She said she wanted to get out. He did not stop. Reeves asked where he took her. Pritchard closed his eyes. He said he drove to a wooded area near the Little Blue River, east of Independence. He parked the car. Emily was crying. She tried to open the door. He grabbed her. He said he did not want to hurt her. He just wanted her to be quiet. But she kept crying. She kept pulling away. He put his hand over her mouth. He said it was an accident. He did not mean to press so hard, but she stopped moving. He sat there with her body in the front seat of his car. He did not know what to do. He was late for work. People would notice. He wrapped her in a tarp he kept in the trunk. He buried her in the woods, shallow grave, covered with leaves and branches. Then he went to work. He clocked in at 7:23. Reeves asked about the mitten. Pritchard said it had fallen off in the car. He found it later that day. He did not know why he kept it. He did not know why he kept the articles either. He said he told himself he would get rid of them, but he never did. He said he thought about Emily every day. He said he was sorry. Reeves did not respond. She stood up. She placed Pritchard under arrest. She read him his rights. He did not resist. He did not ask for a lawyer. He just sat there, staring at nothing. The news spread quickly. By afternoon, every local station was covering the arrest. David Allen Pritchard, 62 years old, charged in connection with the 1991 disappearance of Emily Rose Carter. The reporters stood outside the Independence Police Department, cameras pointed at the building, waiting for a statement. Detective Reeves stood at a podium inside the station. She spoke carefully. She said the investigation was ongoing. She said they had recovered evidence linking Pritchard to Emily. She did not mention the DNA yet. She did not mention the mitten. She said a search was underway in the wooded area near the Little Blue River. She asked for the public's patience. She asked for privacy for the Carter family. Janet Carter heard the news from Marcus. He called her from the station. He was there when Pritchard was brought in. He had watched through the glass as his sister's suspected killer sat in an interrogation room. Marcus's voice shook on the phone. He told his mother they had found him. After 25 years, they had found him. Janet dropped the phone. Michael picked it up. He listened to his son. He did not speak. He just listened. When Marcus finished, Michael hung up. He sat down next to Janet. She was crying. Not the loud, desperate crying from 1991. This was different. Quieter. Deeper. She cried for the daughter she had lost. For the years she had spent not knowing. For the hope she had carried that maybe somehow Emily was still alive. That hope was gone now. The search team arrived at the Little Blue River site at dawn the next morning. Cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar, forensic anthropologists. The area Pritchard described was dense with trees. The underbrush had grown thick over 25 years. The team worked in a grid pattern, slow, methodical. They marked off sections with stakes and string. The dogs alerted near a cluster of oak trees. 50 yards from the riverbank, the team began to excavate. They removed layers of soil carefully, sifting through dirt and roots. 6 feet down, they found fabric. Decomposed, faded, the remnants of a tarp. Beneath it, bones, small, fragile, a child's skeleton. The remains were transported to the Missouri State Highway Patrol Crime Lab. Forensic examination confirmed what everyone already knew. The bones belonged to a child approximately 7 years old, female. The dental records matched. It was Emily Rose Carter. She had been there all along, less than 10 miles from her home, buried in the woods while her family searched, while her face appeared on flyers, while her mother kept her room untouched. She had been there alone, forgotten by everyone except the man who put her there. 20 years later, one overlooked fragment changed everything. That's what we explore here. The moment science meets persistence. If you're new here, subscribe so you don't miss the next story where DNA finally tells the truth. A new case drops every day on the DNA archives. Detective Reeves called the Carters. She asked if they could come to the station. Janet and Michael drove in silence. Marcus met them there. They sat in a small conference room. Reeves sat across from them. She told them what they had found. She told them Emily was coming home. Janet covered her face with her hands. Michael stared at the table. Marcus asked if she had suffered. Reeves said the investigation was still ongoing. She said they would know more after the full autopsy, but she believed it had been quick. Marcus nodded. He did not ask anything else. The funeral was held 3 weeks later, November 2016, 25 years after Emily disappeared. The service was private, family and close friends only. The casket was white, small, covered in flowers. Janet had chosen daisies, Emily's favorite. The church was the same one where Emily had been baptized, the same one where Janet and Michael had prayed every Sunday for her return. The pastor spoke about faith, about grief, about the mystery of God's timing. Janet did not hear most of it. She sat in the front pew holding Michael's hand, staring at the casket. She thought about the last time she had seen her daughter, zipping her purple coat, running toward the mailbox. She thought about all the birthdays Emily never had, the graduations, the weddings, the life stolen from her. After the service, they drove to Mount Washington Cemetery. The grave was on a hill overlooking the town. The headstone was simple. Emily Rose Carter, beloved daughter and sister, 1984 to 1991. Janet placed a stuffed bear on the grave, the same one Emily used to sleep with. Michael stood beside her. He had not cried at the service, but he cried now. Marcus stayed back. He watched his parents. He thought about all the years they had carried this weight, all the years they had hoped. He thought about the man sitting in a cell downtown, the man who had taken his sister, the man whose DNA on a letter to Santa had finally brought the truth to light. David Pritchard was charged with second-degree murder, kidnapping, tampering with evidence. His public defender advised him to plead not guilty, to take it to trial. But Pritchard refused. He said he did not want the Carters to go through a trial. He said he owed them that much. In January 2017, he entered a guilty plea. The courtroom was full. Janet and Michael sat in the front row. Marcus sat beside them. Pritchard stood before the judge. He did not look at the Carters. The judge asked if he understood the charges. Pritchard said he did. The judge asked if he was pleading guilty of his own free will. Pritchard said he was. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Pritchard was led away in handcuffs. He still did not look back. The days after the sentencing felt strange, hollow. For 25 years, the Carters had lived with a question that had no answer. Now the question was answered, but the answer did not bring the relief they had imagined. It brought a different kind of pain, the kind that comes with finality. Emily was not coming home. She had never been coming home. She had been gone since the moment she stepped into David Pritchard's car. Janet returned to the cemetery often. She brought flowers. She sat on the grass beside the headstone. She talked to Emily the way she used to when Emily was small. She told her about the weather, about Marcus and his work, about the neighbor's new dog. She talked until her voice gave out. Then she sat in silence. Michael threw himself into projects. He finished the ones he had started years ago. He built a bookshelf, repainted the garage, fixed the fence in the backyard. He worked until his hands ached, until he was too tired to think. Marcus continued his work in cold cases. He requested a transfer to the Independence Police Department. He wanted to be close to home, close to his parents. He worked with Detective Reeves on other unsolved cases. He learned from her. He saw the way she approached each file with the same careful attention she had given Emily's case. He wanted to be that kind of detective, the kind who did not give up, the kind who believed that answers still existed even in the darkest corners. The town of Independence processed the news in its own way. Some people felt closure, others felt anger. How had Pritchard gone unnoticed for so long? How had he been cleared in the original investigation? Detective Hollis, now in his 70s, read about the arrest in the newspaper. He sat at his kitchen table for a long time. He thought about the interview he had conducted in 1991. He thought about the questions he had asked, the questions he had not asked. He thought about the time card discrepancy he had missed. 8 minutes. He had missed it by 8 minutes. He called Detective Reeves. He told her he was sorry. Reeves said there was nothing to apologize for. She said DNA technology in 1991 was not what it was now. She said Hollis had done everything he could with the tools he had. But Hollis did not feel absolved. He felt the weight of those 25 years. He felt the face of a 7-year-old girl he had failed to bring home. The letter to Santa became a focal point in the media coverage. Reporters wanted to know how Pritchard's DNA had ended up on it. The theory that emerged was simple but chilling. Pritchard had likely seen Emily drop the letter into the mailbox. He had retrieved it, held it, read it. Perhaps he had been watching her for days. Perhaps he had been planning. Or perhaps it had been impulse, a moment of opportunity that spiraled into tragedy. The envelope had been handled, touched, his DNA transferred to the paper. Then he placed it back in the mailbox. No one would have noticed. No one would have thought twice about a letter in a mailbox. But that letter had waited. For 25 years it had waited in an evidence box. And when the technology finally existed to extract the truth from it, the letter spoke. Forensic experts called it touch DNA, the kind of genetic material left behind by skin cells, invisible to the naked eye, but present, persistent. It had survived decades in storage. It had survived the passage of time. And when Detective Reeves sent it to the lab, it had told the story that no witness could. David Pritchard had touched that envelope. He had been there, at the mailbox at the moment Emily disappeared. The science was undeniable. The match was strong. And the confession that followed confirmed what the DNA had already revealed. One small piece of evidence, one overlooked fragment, it had changed everything. The case became a teaching tool. Police academies used it in training. They taught cadets about the importance of preserving evidence, about the advancements in DNA technology, about the value of cold case units. Detective Reeves was invited to speak at conferences. She told Emily's story. She talked about persistence, about the importance of never assuming a case was truly closed. She showed photographs of the evidence box, the purple coat, the mittens, the red envelope. She said that every piece of evidence has the potential to speak, but only if someone is willing to listen. Only if someone is willing to wait for the science to catch up. Janet Carter never spoke publicly about the case. She declined interview requests. She did not want to be on television. She did not want to relive the worst day of her life over and over for an audience. But she wrote a letter. She sent it to Detective Reeves. In it, she thanked her. She said that for 25 years she had lived in a kind of limbo, not knowing if Emily was alive or dead, not knowing if someone had taken her or if she had simply wandered off and gotten lost. The not knowing had been unbearable. But now she knew. And as painful as the truth was, it was better than the silence, it was better than the questions. She said Emily could finally rest, and so could she. Michael Carter died 2 years later. Heart attack. The doctor said it was sudden, but Marcus knew better. His father had been dying slowly for 25 years. The weight of grief had worn him down, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. Janet lived alone after that. Marcus visited often. He brought groceries, he fixed things around the house. He sat with her in the living room. They did not always talk, sometimes they just sat. In the silence. In the shared understanding of what they had lost and what they had survived. David Pritchard remained in prison. He did not appeal his sentence, he did not request parole hearings. He worked in the prison library. He kept to himself. Other inmates knew what he had done, they knew about Emily. Some of them had children, some of them had lost children. Pritchard was not well liked, but he was not attacked. He existed in a kind of isolation. A man who had destroyed a family. A man who had carried a secret for 25 years. A man who had finally been caught by the very thing he had touched and forgotten. A letter to Santa, a child's wish, a fragment of evidence that refused to stay silent. The years moved forward. The case faded from headlines. New stories replaced it. New tragedies. New mysteries. But in Independence, Emily Rose Carter was not forgotten. The elementary school planted a tree in her memory. A small plaque at the base in loving memory of Emily Rose Carter. Forever 7. Students passed it every day. Most did not know the story, but their teachers did. And every December, on the anniversary of her disappearance, the school held a moment of silence. A reminder that some losses never fully heal, that some children never get to grow up. Marcus Carter became a detective in 2019. He wore his badge the way his father had worn his grief, quietly, heavily. He worked cold cases exclusively. He requested files that had gone untouched for decades. He read through witness statements. He looked at evidence logs. He searched for the overlooked fragments, the ones everyone else had missed. He thought about Emily every time he opened a new file. He thought about the letter to Santa, about how something so small had held the answer for so long. He learned to look at evidence differently, not just as objects, but as voices waiting to be heard. Detective Reeves retired in 2021, 30 years with the Independence Police Department. She had solved 43 cold cases during her career, but Emily's case was the one she thought about most. It was the one that had taught her the most. On her last day, she stopped by the evidence room. She asked to see the box one more time. The clerk brought it out. Reeves opened it. The purple coat was still there, the mittens, the red envelope. She held the envelope carefully. She thought about the journey it had taken. From a child's hand to a mailbox to an evidence room to a lab. She thought about the patience required, the faith that answers would come. She closed the box. She thanked the clerk. She walked out of the building. She did not look back. Janet Carter continued her visits to the cemetery, once a week, sometimes more. She brought fresh flowers. She cleared away the old ones. She kept the grave neat, clean. She talked to Emily about everything, about the neighbors, about the news, about Marcus and his wife and their daughter, Emily's niece, a little girl who would never meet her aunt, but who would grow up hearing stories about her, about the girl with the gap in her teeth, the girl who loved strawberry ice cream, the girl who wrote letters to Santa. Janet made sure of that. She made sure Emily was more than a tragedy, more than a headline. She was a person, a daughter, a sister, someone who had been loved, someone who was still loved. The science that solved Emily's case continued to evolve. Touch DNA became more refined, more reliable. Labs developed methods to extract genetic material from smaller and smaller samples, from older and older evidence. Cold cases across the country were reopened. Evidence boxes were pulled from storage. Letters, clothing, weapons, objects that had been sitting untouched for decades. And one by one, answers began to emerge. Faces were given to crimes. Names were attached to mysteries. Families received phone calls they had stopped hoping for. It was not always closure, but it was always truth. In 2023, a documentary crew contacted Janet Carter. They wanted to tell Emily's story. They said it was an important case, a landmark case. They said it demonstrated the power of forensic science, the importance of cold case units. Janet said no. She did not want cameras in her home. She did not want to sit in front of lights and microphones and talk about the worst day of her life. But Marcus convinced her. He said Emily's story could help other families, other investigators. He said it could keep cold cases from being forgotten. Janet agreed, but only on her terms. She would not appear on camera. She would not give interviews, but she allowed the crew to use photographs, to use police records, to tell the story in a way that honored Emily, not as a victim, but as a child who had lived, who had mattered. The documentary aired in 2024. It was called The Letter. It detailed the case from beginning to end, the disappearance, the search, the years of silence, the DNA match, the arrest, the recovery of Emily's remains. It featured interviews with Detective Reeves, with forensic analysts, with experts in cold case investigation. It showed the red envelope, the letter inside, Dear Santa, the crayon drawing, the list of wishes. It showed how a single piece of evidence had waited, had endured, had finally spoken. The documentary won awards. It was screened at film festivals. It was used in criminal justice courses. It became a reference point, a case study, a reminder that evidence never truly goes silent. It simply waits for someone to listen. David Pritchard watched the documentary from prison. Inmates gathered in the common room, the television mounted on the wall. When Emily's face appeared on the screen, the room went quiet. Pritchard sat in the back. He did not move. He did not look away. He watched the entire thing. When it ended, he stood up. He walked back to his cell. He lay down on his bunk. He stared at the ceiling. He thought about the letter, about the morning he had stopped his car, about the choice he had made, the choice that had defined the rest of his life, and the choice that had ended hers. He thought about the DNA, about how something invisible had carried the truth, how it had waited for 25 years, how it had found him. He closed his eyes. He did not sleep. The story reminds us that time doesn't erase truth, it only delays it. If stories like this move you and you want to see more forgotten cases finally solved through DNA, subscribe to the DNA Archives. It's free, and it helps these stories reach more people who still believe in justice after decades of silence. New stories of truth and closure are released every single day. The impact of Emily's case extended beyond Independence. Police departments across Missouri began re-examining their own cold case files. Evidence rooms were audited. Boxes were cataloged. Items that had been deemed irrelevant in the 1980s and 90s were sent for DNA testing. Letters, cigarette butts, drinking glasses, pieces of fabric. The technology had advanced enough that even degraded samples could yield results. And with each new test, new leads emerged. Some cases were solved within months. Others took years. But the process had begun. The silence was breaking. In Kansas City, a case from 1987 was reopened. A young woman had been found in an alley. No identification. No witnesses. Her fingerprints were not in any database. For 36 years she remained a Jane Doe. But investigators had kept her clothing. A jacket, a scarf. DNA was extracted. A profile was built. It was entered into genealogical databases. Within weeks, a family connection was found. The woman was identified. Her name was Sarah. She had been reported missing by her family in Iowa. They had searched for her. They had never stopped hoping. And now, decades later, they finally knew what had happened. Emily's case had shown them it was possible, that answers could still come, even after all that time. Detective Marcus Carter worked a case in 2025, a disappearance from 2001, a teenage boy who had vanished on his way home from a basketball game. No leads, no suspects. The case had gone cold within a year. Marcus requested the evidence. He found a baseball cap the boy had been wearing. It had been recovered near a park 3 days after the disappearance. DNA testing revealed an unknown male profile. Marcus ran it through CODIS, no match. He ran it through genealogical databases, a distant relative, then another. He built a family tree. He narrowed the possibilities. 6 months later, he had a name. An arrest was made. The boy's family finally had answers. Marcus thought about his sister. He thought about how long they had waited. He was grateful this family did not have to wait as long. Janet Carter received letters, not many, but enough. They came from other families, other mothers who had lost children, other parents who had waited decades for answers. They thanked her. They said Emily's story had given them hope, that it had shown them cold cases could still be solved, that evidence could still speak. Janet read every letter. She kept them in a box. She did not respond to most of them. She did not know what to say. But she understood why they wrote. She understood the need to reach out, to connect with someone who had walked the same dark road. She kept the letters because they mattered, because Emily's story had mattered, not just to her family, but to families she would never meet. Michael's grave was next to Emily's. Janet visited them together. She brought flowers for both. She sat between the two headstones. She talked to them. She told Michael about Marcus, about his cases, about his successes. She told Emily about her niece, about how she was learning to ride a bike, about how she had her aunt smile. Janet wondered sometimes what Emily would have become, what she would have studied, who she would have married, what kind of mother she would have been. But those were questions without answers, dreams that had died in the woods near the Little Blue River. All she had now were memories, and the knowledge that the man who had taken those dreams was behind bars, that he would never hurt another child. That was something, not everything, but something. The red envelope remained in the evidence room. It would stay there, permanently archived, a piece of history, a teaching tool. Students and investigators visited the Independence Police Department to see it. They stood in front of the glass case. They looked at the faded paper, the crayon marks, the child's handwriting. They learned about touch DNA, about how genetic material could transfer from skin to surface, about how evidence could wait, could endure, could speak decades later. The letter had become more than evidence. It had become a symbol, a reminder that justice did not have an expiration date, that science could uncover what time had tried to bury. Detective Reeves spent her retirement writing. She documented her cases not for publication but for herself. She wanted to remember. She wanted to preserve the details, the faces, the families, the moments when truth finally emerged. She wrote about Emily, about the day she opened that evidence box, about the moment the DNA results came back, about the look on Janet Carter's face when she learned they had found him. Reeves wrote until her hands cramped, until the memories were on paper, where they could not fade, where they would not be forgotten. In 2026, the forensic analyst who had processed Emily's letter retired. She gave a lecture at the University of Missouri. She talked about the evolution of DNA analysis, about the cases that had shaped her career. She showed slides, photographs of evidence, charts of genetic markers, and then she showed the red envelope. She told the story, the disappearance, the decades of silence, the decision to retest old evidence, the match, the confession, the recovery. She said it was the most important case she had ever worked, not because it was the most complex, but because it had mattered, because a family had finally gotten answers, because a child had finally come home. The lecture hall was full. Students, professors, law enforcement officers. They listened in silence. When the analyst finished, someone raised a hand. They asked if she ever doubted the results, if she ever worried the DNA had been contaminated. The analyst shook her head. She said the testing had been thorough, repeated, verified. She said the science was sound. She said DNA did not lie. It simply told the truth. And in Emily's case, the truth had been waiting. For someone to look, for someone to test, for someone to believe that answers still existed. Even after 25 years, even after hope had faded, even after everyone else had moved on. The truth had waited, and when the time came, it spoke. The town of Independence changed in small ways. Not visibly, not in ways a visitor would notice. But the people who had lived through Emily's disappearance carried it differently now. There was a before and an after. Before, there had been uncertainty. The fear that whoever had taken Emily was still out there, still among them. Still walking the same streets, shopping at the same stores, living the same ordinary life. After the arrest, that fear dissolved, but it left something behind. A quiet acknowledgement that evil did not always announce itself, that it could wear an unremarkable face, that it could live 2 blocks away and no one would know. Parents held their children's hands a little tighter. They watched a little closer, not out of paranoia, but out of awareness, the kind that comes from experience, from loss. The mailbox on the corner of Maple and Truman Road remained. It was repainted twice over the years, but it stayed. A landmark, a place where something had ended and something had begun. People still used it. They dropped letters inside, bills, birthday cards, invitations. Life continued around it. But those who remembered looked at it differently. They thought about the girl in the purple coat, the letter to Santa, the moment everything changed. Marcus Carter's daughter turned 7 in 2027. Her name was Emily. Janet had cried when Marcus told her. She said he did not have to do that. Marcus said he wanted to. He said his daughter should know who her aunt was, should carry her name, should understand that some people leave the world too soon, but they do not leave it forgotten. Young Emily learned about her aunt gradually. Age-appropriate stories, photographs, anecdotes. She learned that her aunt had loved strawberries, that she had worn a silver bracelet, that she had written letters in crayon. And as she grew older, she would learn the rest, the harder parts, the parts that explained why her grandmother sometimes looked sad, why her father worked cold cases, why the name she carried mattered. David Pritchard's health declined in 2028. Diabetes, heart problems. He was moved to the prison medical unit. He spent his days in a small room, white walls, a narrow bed, a television he rarely watched. He received no visitors. His ex-wife had not contacted him since the arrest. He had no children, no siblings, no friends. He was alone, completely. The way he had left Emily, alone in the woods. He thought about that sometimes, about the symmetry of it, about how isolation had become his punishment, not just the prison, but the emptiness, the silence, the knowledge that no one cared if he lived or died. He had erased himself from the world, and the world had moved on without him. Janet Carter turned 70 in 2029. Marcus threw her a small party, family only. A cake, candles, presents she did not need. Janet smiled. She thanked everyone. But later, alone in her room, she thought about all the birthdays Emily never had. 8, 9, 10, all the way to 43, the age Emily would have been. Janet had imagined those birthdays over the years. She had pictured Emily blowing out candles, opening gifts, growing older. But those were fantasies. Beautiful, painful, impossible. The only birthday that mattered was the one Emily had. 7, the last one. The one before everything ended. The little blue river continued to flow. The trees grew taller. The underbrush thickened. The site where Emily had been found was unmarked. No plaque, no memorial, just earth and trees and the quiet movement of water. Some places hold memory even when they do not announce it, even when there is nothing visible to mark what happened. The land remembers, and those who know the story remember. Detective Reeves had driven past it once after her retirement. She did not stop. She did not need to. She knew what was there, what had been there, and what had been taken away. She kept driving, but she thought about it for days afterward, about how close Emily had been all along, about how the answer had been waiting, in the woods, in the evidence box, in the DNA on a child's letter. In 2030, a new generation of forensic scientists entered the field. They had grown up with DNA analysis. It was not new to them. It was foundational, standard. They learned about CODIS, about genealogical databases, about touch DNA and degraded samples, and they learned about cases like Emily's, the ones that had paved the way, the ones that had proven what was possible. They studied the letter to Santa. They analyzed the methods used. They discussed what could be improved, what could be refined. They carried forward the work that had begun decades earlier, the work of giving voice to the silent, of uncovering what had been hidden, of bringing answers to families who had waited too long. Marcus Carter was promoted to sergeant in 2031. He continued to work cold cases, but now he supervised a team. He trained younger detectives. He taught them what Detective Reeves had taught him: patience, thoroughness, belief. He told them about his sister, not often, but when it mattered, when a case felt impossible, when evidence seemed too old, too degraded, too unlikely to yield anything useful. He told them about the red envelope, about how it had sat in a box for 25 years, about how one decision to retest had changed everything. He told them that evidence never stopped being evidence, that it only stopped mattering when people stopped looking, when people gave up. He made sure his team never gave up. Janet Carter's health began to fail in 2032. Nothing dramatic, just the slow accumulation of years. Arthritis, high blood pressure, fatigue. She moved more slowly, she visited the cemetery less often, not because she wanted to, but because her body would not cooperate. Marcus drove her when he could. He walked with her to the graves. He stood beside her while she talked to Emily, to Michael. He did not interrupt. He just waited. And when she was ready, he helped her back to the car. He knew these visits mattered, that they were not morbid, they were connection, they were love. They were the only way his mother knew how to stay close to the people she had lost. The red envelope remained behind glass. Visitors still came. Fewer now, but they came. They read the placard. Emily Rose Carter, 1984 to 1991. Solved through DNA analysis in 2016. They looked at the faded paper. They imagined the child who had written it, the wishes she had made, the future she had believed in. And they understood in some small way why this case mattered, why it had resonated, why it had become a symbol. Because it was not just about science, it was not just about DNA. It was about a child, a family, a community, and the refusal to let silence be the final word. Janet Carter died peacefully in her sleep in 2034. She was 75 years old. Marcus found her in the morning. She looked calm, rested. He called the ambulance even though he knew. He sat with her until they arrived. He held her hand. He thought about all the years she had carried the weight of Emily's disappearance, all the nights she had lain awake wondering, all the days she had visited the cemetery, all the hope she had held onto and then finally released. He thought about how tired she must have been, how ready. He kissed her forehead. He told her she could rest now, that Emily was waiting, that Michael was waiting, that she did not have to carry it anymore. The funeral was small, family, a few friends. The same church where Emily's service had been held. The same pastor, now older, spoke again about faith and grief and the mystery of God's timing. Marcus sat in the front pew with his wife and daughter. Young Emily was 12 now. Old enough to understand loss, old enough to feel it. She cried quietly. She had loved her grandmother, had spent countless afternoons with her, had heard stories about the aunt she was named after. She understood now in a way she had not before what her family had survived, what they had endured, and what they had lost. Janet was buried beside Michael and Emily, 3 headstones in a row. Marcus stood at the grave after everyone else had left. He looked at the names, his father, his sister, his mother, 3 people who had shaped every part of who he was, 3 losses that had defined his life. He thought about the letter to Santa, about how something so small had finally brought the truth. He thought about Detective Reeves, about the decision she had made to retest old evidence, about how persistence had mattered, about how someone had refused to let the case stay silent. He was grateful for that. He would always be grateful. David Pritchard died in prison 6 months later. Heart failure. He was 70 years old. There was no funeral, no service. His body was cremated. The ashes went unclaimed. The prison held them for 60 days as required by law. Then they were scattered in an unmarked location. No gravestone, no memorial, no record of where he had gone. He had wanted it that way. He had written it in his will. He did not want anyone to know where he was buried. He did not want anyone to visit. He did not want to be remembered. And so he was not. The world forgot David Allen Pritchard, but it remembered Emily Rose Carter. The case remained in textbooks, in training manuals, in documentaries. It was cited in academic papers, referenced in lectures, used as an example of how forensic science had evolved, how cold cases could be solved decades later, how evidence, no matter how old, could still speak. The red envelope stayed behind glass in the Independence Police Department, a permanent exhibit. New officers were brought to see it during their training. They learned the story. They learned the lesson. That patience mattered. That science mattered. That families deserved answers, no matter how long it took. Detective Marcus Carter retired in 2042. He had served 23 years. He had solved 61 cold cases. He had brought closure to families who had waited decades. He had learned from the best, from Detective Reeves, from his own experience, from his sister's case. On his last day, he stood in the evidence room. He looked at the glass case, at the red envelope, at the letter inside. He thought about the 7-year-old girl who had written it, about the dreams she had, about the life she should have had. He thought about his mother, about how she had never given up hope, about how she had carried Emily with her until the very end. He thought about his father, about the silence that had consumed him, about the weight of not knowing. Marcus touched the glass. He whispered, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular, just to the air, to the memory, to the evidence that had finally spoken. He walked out of the building. He did not look back. He went home, to his wife, to his daughter, to the life he had built on the foundation of loss. He had learned that grief did not disappear. It simply changed shape. It became part of who you were, part of how you moved through the world. And sometimes, if you were lucky, it became purpose. It became the reason you got up in the morning, the reason you opened another file, the reason you refused to let another family wait as long as his had. Years continued to pass. Independence grew. New houses were built. New families moved in. The story of Emily Rose Carter became history. The kind children learned about in school. The kind that seemed distant, removed. But those who had lived through it knew better. They knew that history was not distant. It was made of moments, of choices, of small decisions that rippled outward, of letters dropped in mailboxes, of DNA left on envelopes, of detectives who refused to give up, of families who carried impossible weight, of science that finally caught up to truth. The mailbox on the corner of Maple and Truman Road was replaced in 2045. The old one had rusted through. The new one was identical. Blue, metal, a slot for letters. People still used it. They dropped envelopes inside without thinking, without knowing, and that was okay. Life moved forward. It had to. But somewhere in an evidence room, a red envelope remained. A reminder, a testament, a voice that had waited 25 years to speak. And when it finally did, it changed everything. The story reminds us that time doesn't erase truth, it only delays it. If stories like this move you and you want to see more forgotten cases finally solved through DNA, subscribe to the DNA Archives. It's free, and it helps these stories reach more people who still believe in justice after decades of silence. New stories of truth and closure are released every single day. Emily Rose Carter was 7 years old when she disappeared. She loved strawberries. She wore a silver bracelet. She wrote letters in crayon. She had dreams. She had a future. And though that future was stolen, her story endured. Not as a tragedy, but as a truth. A truth that refused to stay buried, a truth that waited, and a truth that, in the end, brought light to the darkest of silences.